Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Dorothy Gilliam. I am an air quality planner here at the North Central Texas Council of Governments. Thank you all for joining our energy resiliency as part of emergency preparedness strategies roundtable. We're very excited to be hosting this, and we have a lot of really great presentations and presenters here with us today. So I'm going to go ahead and jump right on in. Awesome. So just quickly running through our agenda, I'm going to be taking us through some housekeeping and welcome and housekeeping items, and then also just kind of bringing it to why we're here today, talking about energy resilience as part of emergency preparedness strategies. And then I'm going to hand it over to Marty Chester with FEMA, who will be speaking about building resilient infrastructure in communities. And then from there, we'll hand it over to Gavin Dillingham with HARC, and he's going to be talking about how combined heat and power can maintain operations during extreme weather events. Then next up, we'll have Eddy Trevino with the State Energy Conservation Office. He will be talking about combined heat and power in Texas. And then lastly, we will have Caley Johnson with the National Renewable Energy Lab, and he will be talking about fuel diversification to improve transportation resiliency. And then we will wrap that all up with a Q&A session. All right, so kind of just jumping into some background as why we're here today, why we're hosting this, and kind of energy resilience and emergency preparedness, those strategies, and just kind of prefacing those. So some background, our team here at COG has received funding through the Texas State Energy Conservation Office to work on energy management and efficiency projects and programs within the region. So as part of our scope of work with this, we are working on ways to incorporate energy efficiency and grid resiliency planning into hazard mitigation plans. So as we all know, Winter Storm Yuri and the summer heat waves are really good reminders of the need to have different options available for resiliency and energy. So our goal is to develop suggested language to go into these hazard mitigation plans and action tables, and provide a menu of things, a variety of things that are achievable. So ranging from what can be done at, a little bit more of a higher budget, or maybe not so much, more of a limited budget and a shorter timeline. So quickly, just some elements that kind of all play into grid and energy resilience. We have transportation strategies, which Caley will be talking a little bit about later. So kind of adopting and using a variety of alternative fuel vehicles and alternative fuels within your fleet. So for example, during Winter Storm Yuri, TxDOT used their natural gas trucks while a lot of the diesel pumps were not in service during that time. Now, taking it to microgrids and combined heat and power, we're not going to go into too much detail about microgrids. We did just want to throw out that we will be hosting a microgrid tour in North Texas in 2022. So definitely be on the lookout for more information on that, as well as a presentation that will go into a little bit more detail on microgrids. But microgrids can be powered by distributed generators, batteries, or renewable sources. And there is a switch that can separate the microgrid from the actual grid to function as a quote unquote island. So these are a great strategy and also address FEMA hazards. Moving into renewables, renewables coupled with storage can provide backup power if and or when the grid goes down at any time. Energy efficiency and energy efficiency strategies allow for more critical services to be delivered with limited generation capacity, and they can provide cost savings. And then lastly, building codes. So the adoption and enforcement of building codes can ensure, the sound construction and help build a culture of preparedness. And constructing to the latest model codes protects not only occupants and residents of buildings, but the nation's infrastructure as a whole and those investments. Awesome. So these are just some quick examples of microgrid projects. Again, we will be posting the slides after our meeting today, and we have a lot of other really good resources and other slides related to microgrids. So if you are interested, definitely we will send out the slides and post them to our website after today. So definitely feel free to check those out. All right. So before we kind of jump into our presentations today, we are going to make this a little bit interactive with some polling questions. But we just kind of wanted to see if you all already coordinate or collaborate with any of the following regarding hazardous mitigation activities. So I see people are already killing it and entering in answers. So, okay, we'll give it about 20-ish more seconds. Awesome. Energy managers, I like to see it. Code officials, that's great. Awesome. Awesome. Awesome, awesome. I see the numbers kind of starting to slow down. Very good. This is great. This really gives us a good picture of kind of where you all are coming from. So fabulous. Okay, great. So if you were logged into this polling system, please stay on it if you can. We have just a couple more polling questions kind of trickled out and towards the end of our presentations today. So, and if you run into any issues, just feel free to enter that into the chat. Okay, I feel like energy managers kind of took the cake here. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and hand it on over to Marty Chester. He is going to be talking about building resilient infrastructure and communities. So Marty, just let me know whenever you're ready for me to advance, and I'll advance them for you, and you can go ahead and take it away.
All right. Thank you so much, Dorothy, and good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to keep my camera on, but if I start sounding like a robot or start, doing one of those jittery things, Dorothy, let me know and I'll kill the video. It'll increase the bandwidth.
You got it.
Thank you, ma'am. But yeah, thank you guys so much for inviting me to participate on the call today. I'm looking forward to just giving a brief synopsis of the building resilient infrastructure and communities, or as we all in government like to use acronyms, BRIC. I do want to focus on a little bit about the name as we continue on. Resilient infrastructure. It goes back to what Dorothy was talking about just a little bit ago on how do we do things a little bit bigger, better, stronger. It may cost a little bit more, but those dividends it'll pay off in the future are so much worth it. Next slide, please. Okay, what is a door? What is a brick, right? How do we get there, right? So the Disaster Recovery Reform Act, DRRA, another acronym, Section 1234, amended the Stafford Act. In a nutshell, it takes 6% of all disasters in the United States, takes that money, puts it in a pot, and that's where the money comes from for this. Typical eligible applicants and sub-applicants for our programs, typical for all federal programs. Next slide, please. Okay, what is BRIC and why is it important? Typically, after a disaster rolls through, you'll have local jurisdictions will have a bunch of people show up in different colored shirts, blue, and our FEMA's public assistance program will put back your damaged element to the pre-existing conditions, right? We'll put back that culvert, we'll put back that generator, we'll put back that where it was at. But that doesn't look forward, right? We got climate change. We got here in Texas. I'm in North Texas, and I remember in February that it wasn't a pretty week, right? So how do we build back better, stronger, and not just keep replacing what we just got damaged? So the BRIC program seeks to shift the federal focus from a reactive disaster approach to a more proactive investment in communities, resilience. How do we, if the power goes out, is there a backup? How do we keep the power going out in the first place? So the BRIC program is about a cultural shift instead of reactive to proactive. Next slide, please. For this upcoming funding cycle, which just opened up, so the funding cycle is open now. The BRIC program has $1 billion in it for this FY21 cycle. This is double from the previous year. So the previous year submittals, we had so many applications that came in for not so much money that FEMA went to Congress and says, hey, the need is there. One of those needs is resilient infrastructure, power grids, things like that. So Congress gave us additional money for this coming up cycle. Next slide, please. And this is just what I just spoke about, the eligible applicants and sub-applicants. Everyone on this call, I kind of did a little check, is eligible to apply through the Texas Division of Emergency Management for the BRIC program. Next slide, please. Just a little bit of time frame. The red is the starting point. So it was the publication of the Notice of Funding Opportunities. Right now, we're in that second phase. I call this the pizza tracker. You know, Domino's, you can look on their app and you can see where your pizza's at. This is where we're at. We're in that second phase right now. Now is the time to start communicating with the state agencies, with Texas Division of Emergency Management, on potential opportunities to mitigate, to provide resilience, things of that nature. Next slide, please. Okay, what are our priorities? A couple quick things. Mitigate risk to public infrastructure, emphasize resilient infrastructure to disadvantaged communities, incorporate nature-based solutions, and incentivize adoption of codes like Dorothy was talking about a little bit ago. If we have additional building codes, then that's going to also strengthen our ability to withstand the next disaster, the next thing. Next slide, please. One of the current administration's priorities is Justice 40. It's Executive Order 14008. I should have that memorized. But it's talking about how do we prioritize federal funding to target disadvantaged communities. One of the things I really want to talk about is when we're doing a project, say for instance, if we're doing an energy project or if we're doing a drainage project or whatever that project is, let's look at all that can be benefited from that, not just the immediate area, but everyone within that. How can we incorporate more people into that benefit area? We may need to expand that scope of work a little bit, or just look at the population affected and see if we can incorporate some more disadvantaged communities into our projects. Next slide, please. All right, this is where we get into a little bit more of the meat of what we're talking about. What are we talking about here? What can we do with brick, right? Project scoping, I'll talk about that in a moment. Building code activities. If we as a community want to strengthen our building codes, if we want to take that additional, we want to do enhanced building codes, the BRIC funding is a great funding opportunity to strategize and get funding on how do we increase our local building codes. What does that mean? What does that look like? So that way we can get more money to the vulnerable population, more targeted, and we're also protecting our infrastructure. Wildfires, as you can see in California and Oregon, that's a big thing. Not so much in Texas, but in the western side, it's really huge. Earthquake warning systems as well. We're close to the one of the big faults. I think it's in Arkansas, Oklahoma. That I live in Denton. The last time we had a tremor, we kind of felt it a little bit here. So just keep that in mind as well. Next slide, please. Project scoping. We want to do something, but we don't really know what we want to do, but we know we got a problem. We kind of know what we want to do, but we don't really know what we want to do. We call that project scoping. The BRIC program can provide funding to help you as the community to develop that out, right? Whether we're talking about microgrids, whether we're talking about drainage projects, energy resilience. We have, for instance, if we, in a later slide I'll show you, we have a hospital, critical facility that keeps growing, but their generators don't power half the hospital. So how do we work that? What is the alternative solution to just buy more generators, right? So project scoping is a great opportunity when we know we have a problem, but we don't really know the solution. So this is a great opportunity to help find that solution. Next slide, please. Cost share requirements. This is your typical federal program. It's 75% federal, 25% non-federal. But that last two bullets, at the local level, we need to manage these grants, right? Which requires a lot of time, effort, energy to manage the grants, not only to pay to vendors, but making sure our staff at the local level are maintaining the proper relationships and maintaining the vendors and getting our widgets when we need to get our widgets. That cost right there is 100% federally funded. So the project portion is the cost share, but to manage the grant program at the local level, that's 100% federally funded. So that's a huge win. It's a huge difference from many of the other grant programs on many other the federal program levels. Next slide, please. We kind of talked a little bit about microgrids off and on. This one right here is a good example. This is to enhance a current system. This is a tribal. This is out of California. It's the Blue Lake tribal in right out of California. One of the issues that they had, as you can see the mountain range there. Once we had big heavy snows, the power got cut off a lot of times, and it was a while before it came on. So one of the interesting things about this project is leveraging partnerships. This was a leverage between tribal government, county government, state government, several different other federal agencies as well. But it was a great opportunity for partnerships and to develop these here. As you can see, we've got solar screens on the bottom on the left-hand side. That's scalable. If the community, if the tribe adds on additional buildings, we can add on additional more. So going kind of back to what Dorothy was talking about separation, we can separate these out during blue sky times and use the regular gas, propane, whatever that is to fuel it. But in times of need, when those are not available, this is a backup to that to make sure those critical facilities don't go without the power that they needed. One of these is a critical facility. It's a healthcare facility. And it talks about, and we start looking at future conditions as well in this one here, where we talk about, okay, well, we know what the need is today, but what's going to happen in 5, 10 years from now? So I'm not an engineer, but whenever we looked at these on an engineering phase, we looked at it as scalable. Can we scale this out? So I encourage you guys when you're talking about projects, not only look for today, but anticipate out what the need's going to be in 5, 10, 15 years and make it scalable so that it'll address the needs for today, but also in the future. Next slide, please. This brings it a little bit closer to home, like I was speaking about. This is a hospital in Texas, Texas County Memorial Hospital. They outgrew their current capacity. They kept building onto the hospital because people keep moving there and they need the services. The generators they currently have are natural gas generators. Well, what happens when we got a big ice storm or something that those pipes freeze? What we ended up doing here was installing solar panels on the roof as a supplement to the generators. So it's not augmenting, it's not replacing. So if one doesn't work, the other one is there as well. So start thinking also about redundancies as we go forward and looking at energy resilience and energy efficiencies. Also keep in mind the redundancy factors. Next slide, please. Okay. I talked a little bit about brick. How did we get brick? Where did it come from? What can we do with brick? The application, I showed you a little pizza tracker where we at in the process. So what are the next steps? So the BRIC program is ran, thank you. The BRIC program is ran through the Texas Division of Emergency Management. They're based out of Austin. The contact number and email address is right there on the line. The application dates, these are the federal application deadlines. The state's going to have they usually have a couple weeks prior to that just to make sure that to go back and answer any questions and things like that. But if you have any questions or if this sparked any interest, please reach out to Mr. Jasper Cook at the Texas Division of Emergency Management, and he'll help you walk through the processes. Let him know that you were on a webinar with this guy named Marty from FEMA that was really energetic about the BRIC program, and you want to know a little bit more about it and what the BRIC program can do to assist your community. Remember, project scoping is always a great opportunity when we know we got a problem, but we don't really know the solution. It's a great way to get funding to find that solution. Next slide, please. I put this on here. Ms. Northey's going to send out some these slides later on, but this is some additional information that's available. So just wanted to spur your interest on that. And I think this is going to round me out, Ms. Dorothy, and I'll turn it back over to you, ma'am, barring any questions.
Marty, thank you so much. That was a great overview and a lot of great things that you touched on in there. I will say if anyone does have any questions, definitely feel free to throw them in the chat for Marty or hold on to them and hold on to them for our Q&A session after our presenters are done today. So thank you again, Marty. I really appreciate it. Awesome. Okay, so I am going to now hand it over to Gavin Dillingham with HARC. He is the Program Director of Clean Energy Policy over at HARC, and he's going to be talking about combined heat and power and how it can help maintain operations during extreme events. So Gavin, it's all yours. You just let me know when to move on to the next slide.
Sounds good, Dorothy. Thank you. All right, so I'm going to be talking today a bit about power system resilience. And so we've had a few issues, especially back in February, and then also just kind of seems to be on a more regular basis where we're seeing these power outages. And sometimes they're, pretty minor, issues and power comes on fairly quickly. And other times we can see power out for several hours and several days. And it largely depends on, if residential versus commercial versus critical infrastructure versus industry, to what degree that has impacts on people and such. And so with the project we have with the Department of Energy, through their Advanced Manufacturing Office, there's the Combined Heat and Power Technical Assistance Partnership, and that's largely focused on how do we ensure power systems maintain operations over time, and this is focused on combined heat and power, so on-site power there. And so I believe I have about 30 minutes or so, and I have a bunch of slides, so some of these will go by pretty quick, but since they'll be shared, everyone can have access to them later and follow up with questions. So just quickly, we're going to do a CHP overview for those that are new and wondering what CHP is. It's not California Highway Patrol or Child Protective Services or anything like that. It's combined heat and power. We're also going to talk about decarbonization in CHP. Under the new administration, we can start talking about climate change again. And so we want to emphasize the importance of CHP in helping cities and communities meet greenhouse gas reduction goals. Important for this, of course, we're going to be talking about CHP and resilience, so keeping the lights on, and then the resources and tools that we've developed with Department of Energy to help folks out to figure out what works best for them. If you go to the next slide. So CHP overview next. So just quickly, the technical assistant partnerships, there's a bunch of us out there, 10 of us out there. Our organization, HARC, operates the South Central and the Upper West. We do about 11 states here, but mainly focused on end user engagement, so really helping to build capacity and understanding of what CHP is, how it can help with cost savings, how it can help with resilience, decarbonization. But key to a lot of the work we do is we provide no cost or free technical assistance. And so we help companies, organizations, governments run early stage critical infrastructure studies to see if they're, see how resilient their sites are and what are the opportunities for microgrids, whether that's solar plus storage and combined heat and power or just combined heat and power by itself. What are the economic opportunities around that? So actually recently we just did a study for the city of Houston for 15 of their critical infrastructure sites looking at solar storage and CHP to see what would work best there. So that's a no cost service provided by our program here. Next slide. So quickly, combined heat and power here. Really what we're doing is providing on-site power as well as the thermal services. So that could be for domestic hot water. Thank you. You read my mind. That's actually good to go to that slide. No, keep on that slide. There you go. Cool. And I think it may have automatically advanced. So in any case, with combined heat and power, you have an on-site power system, and that can be a turbine or a reciprocating engine that's typically fed by natural gas. But as we'll talk about later, there's a lot of different fuel sources, especially low carbon fuel sources that can power these systems. That turns a generator, which of course creates electricity, and that goes to the building. And in cases now, it actually is being exported to the grid to provide additional revenue resources to that site. But the efficiency comes from the heat recovery unit, the heat exchanger that grabs that heat from the engine and produces domestic hot water, produces steam, and also can be used for absorption cooling or steam chillers as well. So both cooling and heating applications can come from combined heat and power. And in many cases can replace the use of a boiler or replace some of your other thermal apparati that are on site there. Next slide. So CHP can go a wide variety of things. And typically when you look at CHP or cogeneration, people think about fairly large systems, so hundreds of megawatts or so. And there are a large number of those in Texas, especially along the ship channel. that are fairly large systems. But we actually end up doing a lot of studies for much smaller systems. So 1 megawatt to 3 megawatt. And we actually have some studies we've done or analysis that we've done that have been more in the hundreds of kilowatts, 250 kilowatts or so. And so the way CHP systems are set up, you can go very small to very large, depending on the application. And they run the gamut from, at police stations, fire stations, correctional facilities, wastewater treatment plants, hospitals, data centers, hotels and resorts. Actually, we do a good number of those. Food processing, so you name it, CHP has been able to find an application there and provide those services on site. Next split. So benefits of CHP, kind of quickly already hit on these, but more efficient than having separate generation. So once again, we're not grabbing power from the grid, we're generating power on site. So you're not having what's called line loss. You're not losing that additional power that's being transmitted over. So you're having to use less energy to produce the same amount of power. So more efficient in that regard. Typically lower operating costs. What we're seeing a lot more interest now, and I'll go into this more detail later, but utilities are showing more interest in this because it provides what's called non-wire alternatives, which provides a greater benefit or incentive to them to invest or be more friendly towards CHP because it helps reduce grid congestion, it helps with reliability, it helps with resilience, and kind of keeps the power system more flexible out there. And then also it's known and has indicated its ability to significantly reduce emissions, particularly when you're looking at a grid that's still fairly fossil fuel heavy. The use of CHP systems can reduce emissions significantly there. Next slide. So as I mentioned, the utilities are becoming a lot more friendly around CHP. Historically, you'd seen these what are called killer CHP rates, where utilities would come in and provide a very low electricity rate, which would make it not economical to do CHP because the economics would not work. But we're seeing now that CHP is becoming more utility friendly because it can provide reliability and resilient services. So in some cases, working say with some of our major utilities here in Texas, they'll look for opportunities where there's congestion on the grid, where they're having reliability issues, and maybe you have a large power user. And they'll look to site a CHP system there or a battery storage system there to help bolster and supply power to the grid there, taking off some of the congestion issues with the grid. And so utilities are more willing to allow those systems to provide favorable rates in that regard, as well as looking into actually owning and operating these systems, at least those maybe municipal utilities. Of course, the transmission distribution utilities cannot own generation, but they can help facilitate the placement of those. So in any case, much more friendly environment to do this and much easier to do this in Texas than it had been in the past. Next slide. So going into the decarbonization of CHP, and I've alluded to this a little bit earlier, but really what we wanted to point out is that CHP can be a very efficient way to generate power and thermal energy. It reduces the CO2 emissions. And we're seeing a growing interest in use of renewable natural gas, of hydrogen-fueled CHP. We've actually been working with a project at University of Montana, Missoula, who's putting in a new natural gas-based CHP system with the expectation that they'll be using hydrogen in the next 5 years to power that system. We're also seeing a lot of the OEMs, those that build these, the turbines, are actually building with the expectation of where you can mix natural gas and hydrogen, essentially, and then eventually move to fully hydrogen. There's still some efficiency questions around that, burning 100% hydrogen. But there is a move to have that mix at this point, which allows for a significant reduction in CO2 and emissions around that. And so once again, can really help when you're looking at the grid overall. So Texas, largely is a natural gas, still fossil fueled system, power system that we have out there. Bringing on CHP, especially CHP with solar plus storage or some sort of microgrid combination, you can have a much lower emissions profile than, say, getting power off the grid there. So in any case, just important to be thinking about that. And we go to the next slide. And just once again, a little more information as far as how it not only reduces CO2 emissions, but through the efficient burning of these CHP systems, you actually reduce a lot of the criteria pollutants. So if you're in an area that's maybe not attainable for ozone, So those non-attainment areas, most of our urban centers within Texas are non-attainment in that regard. CHP has been found to reduce some of those criteria pollutants as well by just more efficiently burning natural gas systems that are out there. So in any case, I wanted to really emphasize, because we know a lot of cities, and a lot of cities we talked to doing climate action planning. We actually did the City of Houston's climate action plan ourselves, or help facilitate that effort. But we're seeing, a lot of cities are really concerned about looking at natural gas-based CHP systems or looking at natural gas-based microgrids because it's a concern about increasing emissions too much, increasing, negatively impacting their goals. But we wanted to emphasize that CHP systems can actually help with that decarbonization effort and help reach those goals as well there. You can skip the next slide and we'll go into CHP and resilience there. All right, so the main point of what we're wanting to talk about today is really the resilience benefits that CHP can provide. And the reason I have, of course, my pie here is that we want to, point out that if we cut off all CO2 emissions today, there's still so much CO2 in the atmosphere at this point that a lot of the extreme weather conditions that we're seeing are likely to continue to some degree. It's just essentially, as the title of the presentation says, baked in this regard. And so we want to not only work towards decarbonization, but we also want to work towards and make sure we're a very resilient power system as well to deal with some of these issues. Just give you more context of some of the issues we're facing. I'm sure many of you have seen these NOAA slides before, but it's always important to kind of emphasize. This is back in 2020 as far as the different types of extreme weather events that happened across the United States. And these are all those $1 billion plus events for each one of these. 11 of the 22 happened in Texas. A lot of those, of course, were hurricane related, but a variety of other kind of convection storms, flooding events, hailstorms, high wind events also had significant impacts as well. And so we see, go to the next slide, an increasing tendency of these storms continuing to happen and leading to significant disruptions in power outages and just disruptions to the grid. In this latest slide, you actually see Winter Storm Yuri in that far purple little box on the far right there that caused our last major power outage. Oh, thanks for pointing to that. In any case, we're seeing, just an overall increase in billion-dollar disaster events, increasing costs associated with it. We talk a lot with utilities and power generators and just kind of energy planners, and we see them using historical weather data and a lot of the stuff that they're looking at, and when they're looking at projecting future, future weather patterns and such. And what's really important to be thinking about is that what we've seen in the past is not what we're going to be seeing in the future. Just like if you're investing in stocks, you can't expect what's in the past to be in the future. And we're seeing that with downscaled climate data as well as significant changes as far as especially temperature and precipitation events, hurricane, sea level rise that are going to have impacts on our infrastructure and are going to potentially lead to a higher number of power disruptions. And so we're working closely with a lot of utilities now to help them better understand how to use downscaled climate data to really to figure out, what does that future look like and how do they mitigate that risk and make their systems more adaptive and essentially improve the adaptive capacity of the entire power system for these future events that are coming. If we go to the next slide. So just quickly, if many of you may know, Glasgow COP26 is coming up here in the near term, next couple of weeks or so. And so that's where we're going to be talking about a lot new goals and opportunities to decarbonize. But the IPCC, Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, recently came out on their newest report that a lot of this COP26 is going to be looking at. But in any case, we just have continued to see, since the last report came out, significant intensification or rapid intensification of extreme weather events that are happening just due to a higher level of concentration of CO2. And so once again, kind of going to the point of, we're in a point now is a lot of it's kind of getting baked in, and we need to start looking at both adaptive capacity and decarbonization here. If we go to the next slide. All right, so for this particular one, just once again wanting to point to the amount of power disturbances that we're starting to see across the United States. It's on a general rise. And then also just power disturbances in general. Many people think they're squirrels that cause a lot of these issues, which, squirrels do have a significant impact on our power system when they get caught up in some of these power components there. But ultimately, it's extreme weather events and natural disasters that lead to a significant amount of these power disturbances. And we go to the next slide. Oh, good, it's animated. Okay. So what we wanted to show here was Hurricane Ida. So that happened in New Orleans a couple months ago. And if we hit it once, there we go. So this is Entergy's power outage map that happened. Down at the bottom right there, kind of over the lower right there, that's New Orleans. Over to the left is Baton Rouge, and up on top of that is Yuma. And this is the day, a day after Hurricane Ida hit. And as you can see all that red there, and that's all power outages. And what essentially happened there were, I believe, all 8 of the transmission feeders that go into New Orleans went down. There was also a natural gas combined cycle plant that was inside New Orleans that was built after Hurricane Katrina. That was to be add additional resilience to New Orleans, but once again, the distribution system went down and they were not able to distribute power from that natural gas plant. The key thing we just wanted to indicate is this is, a major city within the United States. The entire transmission distribution system went down. And if we go to the next slide, when we go to the next day, this is where it looks like. This is day 2. And we go to the next one. Is that day 3? In any case, continuing to move through these days. And you see Baton Rouge was recovering a little bit, but some of these other places took a long time to recover. And if I get my numbers up here real quick, it was really interesting. Let me see 1 second. Yeah, so peak outages in New Orleans was about 1.1 million people. About 48% of the state was out. Even a week in, 34% of the population was still without power. About 750,000 or so people or customers without power. And even into day 20, 25,000 customers were still without power. And so just really important to kind of emphasize that although the transmission system, our distribution system is a wonderful machine, and our grid is a wonderful machine that provides, efficient, cost-effective power, it's very important, especially as we live in Texas, and for those along the Gulf Coast, to be thinking about, there needs to be other opportunities to look at improving power system resilience. And so we go to the next slide there, and this is just Winter Storm Yuri. Winter Storm Yuri, of course, we had a significant power outages. Almost 5 million people were out, or 5 million customers were out of power at one point. And so just has, significant outages over that time that once again lasted multiple days. There's a lot of different options here in order to mitigate that risk. It's a matter of finding ways in which to make that cost-benefit analysis work. And we've actually been working on some programs recently to really help organizations. And this is what we talk to when we talk with a lot of folks that are looking at CHP or microgrids, is how do you value that benefit of resilience into your cost calculations? Because when we really look at this, typically we look at first cost, what that simple payback looks like. But instead, it's important to start figuring out what are those resilience benefits. What are the cost of losing power if you're a critical infrastructure asset, or if you're a business, or just in community at large? What's that cost of losing power? And we know those costs. We know what hourly costs are when a power system goes down. That's easy to quantify. It's the likelihood and the duration of those power outages that's difficult to quantify. And that's where we're starting to be able to use downscaled climate data that allows us to develop probability distributions around the likelihood and intensity of events. And by having that information, we can actually start calculating what's the overall cost benefit of incorporating a microgrid or incorporating a CHP system, whether that's, CHP by itself or solar plus storage associated with it, or whatever that potentially combination looks like there. So the work of that, developing that resilience framework, that resilience valuation framework is really key, and a lot of stuff we help and work people through to help understand. So once again, here just CHP increases resilience. Of course, for end users, really help folks, especially those that are properly developing configure CHP systems that can work in island mode, that have black start capability, that can work separate from the grid there. We've talked a little bit about how utilities really use CHP to help with grid congestion and reliability. And then, of course, for communities, especially for public infrastructure, public health related reasons, to help first responders, The availability of microgrids and CHPs to maintain power over these times is key, of course. Go to the next slide. All right, so we'd like to kind of discuss, what's the difference between backup generation and CHP? A lot of people like to go to that low cost option of backup generation. Let me just throw a couple diesel generators in there and everything's going to be okay. The problem with that is that typically diesel systems don't operate very well. In many cases, they're not properly maintained, or the fuel supply may not be adequate, or may not be able to get new fuel supply to them. And so it can be a significant issue if you're reliant on a backup system, backup generator. And so CHP systems need to be designed in a way and developed in a way that allows them to provide the critical load to that site, of course. But they also need to make sure that they're tied to the appropriate infrastructure. So natural gas infrastructure has shown itself to be highly robust and resilient. Even during Winter Storm Yuri, natural gas was still being delivered to CHP systems across the state, as well as to residential commercial properties. It had been kind of not necessarily delivered to the large power generators, but due to health and safety purposes, it continued to be sent to residences and commercial properties. And so it demonstrated itself still in that case to be highly resilient and robust. Anyway, you've got to take those into considerations when you're looking at CHP versus a diesel generator or just an on-site generator. Low upfront costs may be lower at that point for a standalone generator, but when you look at the overall life and operation of these systems, you typically pay out better on this with a CHP or a microgrid. If you go to the next slide. This is just an example out of the Department of Energy's Energy Resilience Accelerator they held a couple of years ago, just showing the different types of systems that are out there, from battery storage to solar to CHP to standby generators, and how they withstand a variety of different issues, whether that's flooding to high winds to wildfire, snow and ice. The clear circles indicates they're unlikely to experience any type of major impacts, and the filled-in circles indicates that they're likely to see significant disruptions, disruptions to deal with equipment damage or fuel supply interruption as well. So important to look at a variety of different systems. And so microgrids, of course, are very interesting because they can provide that diversity of resources there to ensure that you even have greater resilience than focusing on one specific system there. Go to the next slide. Just an example, Rice University has done some really cool work, not only on the zero carbon focus as far as significantly reducing emissions, but they've also, during Winter Storm Yuri, operated very well during that entire event, and were able to keep the campus operational and the lights on and the research labs going and et cetera there. So a really good, interesting case. TECO is another one in the Texas Medical District, the UTMB down in Galveston, Wesleyan up in Fort Worth, a variety of different places doing great work, allowing to keep the power systems on, as well as reducing emissions for those sites as well. So go to the next slide. Just some resources out there. There's the Resilience Planning Guide that's made available by the Department of Energy through their Resilience Accelerator. And then a paper we put out a few years ago, it was actually after winter or hurricanes, Superstorm Sandy or so, that hit the Northeast coast, about how CHP once again can be a significant benefit to critical facilities and help first responders to be available and able to respond during these major events. Next slide. All right, so just quickly, tools and resources. As I said, one of our main focus areas is providing technical assistance. And so we start from the very beginning. We work with cities, counties, state level, universities, private sector, really kind of figuring out what are the priorities for looking at resilient power infrastructure. What are your different options? What are the economic technical analysis we can do to make sure that you're going down the right path? Then we help with the procurement process, helping with RFP, RFQ development, act as an owner's rep in many regards, do third-party reviews, and all this is no-cost, free services provided through the Department of Energy to anyone we're working with there. So once again, a full-service kind of support there to help with that CHP microgrid deployment there. Next slide. So just some other examples there. CHPE Catalog, that's just, if you're looking for smaller CHP systems, it's a great new tool that's available out there, give you an idea of what's available and the sizes of different systems. If you're brand new to CHP, this primer is a great idea, a great way to just to familiarize yourself or other key decision makers in your organization about how CHP works there. Go to the next one. We have a lot of project profiles. I think over 200 or so project profiles out there. They give you an idea of, lessons learned, best practices, how systems are configured, developed, used, and their applicability and application. There's a whole bunch of them put together for Texas that we can share a specific link to that if anyone's interested. Some fact sheets about the different technologies that are available. And then EPA does a really nice job on the different incentives and rebates that are out there. There is an investment tax credit now available to CHP and waste heat to power for the next several years that can provide a nice little boost to those systems. Finally, contact information there, but I think give my contact information later. So in any case, CHP, great opportunity to improve resilience, to decarbonize, to lower operating costs, and as the CHP TAP, funded by the Department of Energy, we're here as a free resource to allow you to kind of see if, how we can make your systems more resilient, how we can improve energy efficiency, and how we can just kind of help overall public health and safety of, especially for your first responders and that critical infrastructure there. So thank you for the opportunity to chat today.
Gavin, thank you so much. I apologize. I was jumping the gun with a couple slides there.
And you were flying through there, Dorothy, but that's okay. You kept me on pace.
Oh, thank you so much. That was a really great, thorough presentation on CHP. And I know we have a couple of questions in the chat, which we will definitely, Gavin, feel free to take a look at those. And if you think you want to answer them in the chat, feel free to, or not. They seem like they could be good discussion questions potentially. So we can always circle back to them at the end during the Q&A. So we are going to definitely get to our other two presenters. Thank you so much, Gavin, again. We will be hearing from you in a little bit. So yes, awesome. So I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to Eddy Trevino. He is the director at the Texas State Energy Conservation Office. He is going to be speaking briefly on combined heat and power in Texas. So Eddy, I'm going to go ahead, hand it over to you, and you just let me know when to advance to the next slide.
Thank you, Dorothy. Hi, this is Eddy Trevino. I'm the director of the State Energy Office in Austin, Texas. So let's go ahead and go to the next slide if we could. Our office provides a variety of services. Our mission is to help public entities reduce their energy costs and do this in a way that protects the environment. And we just want them to max their energy efficiency. But you see at the top left corner, we also have some statutory requirements. Some of them deal with local government reporting, which I'm sure you're familiar with. Another aspect of our statutory reporting requirements and statutory requirements are related to CHP. Let's go to the next slide. If you look on our webpage, you can see under the resources section, there is a hyperlink for combined heat and power in Texas. And the reason there's a hyperlink is because we've been assigned through statute a responsibility to develop guidelines. In this, you can see this is Title 10 of the Texas Government Code, Chapter 2311. You can see that whenever there is construction or extensive renovation of a critical government facility, or if you're replacing a major HVAC equipment in a critical government facility, then you're required to conduct a feasibility study to see if CHP can save energy. And the litmus test would be if it can pay for itself within a 20-year period of its installation. So the feasibility study is required. After the feasibility study is completed, then you'll see in that next paragraph that with the exception of cogeneration in Chapter 2302, the entity may equip the facility with a CHP system, provided that the facility says it can pay for itself in less than or equal to 20 years. You notice that the feasibility study is a shall, and that the replacement of equipment is a may. So keep those two words in mind after you do your analysis. Our requirement as part of this statute is to develop guidelines for the evaluation of a CHP system. Now, those guidelines can be downloaded from our website, And basically, the essence of the guidelines is that it defines a critical facility. It also talks about the feasibility study, and it describes what information needs to be included as part of a feasibility study. So in that sense, the work that Gavin does at HARC fits right into what we're requiring in terms of that feasibility study and the outcomes of that feasibility study. So what you should do if you're interested in CHP, if you have a critical facility, and if you're doing work, whether you're constructing a new facility, renovating an existing facility, or replacing an HVAC system within that facility, remember that you have to conduct a feasibility study. It's a requirement to conduct it. It's a may if you want to implement those, use the feasibility study to implement a new CHP system in your facility. But remember that the feasibility study is a requirement. And so what we always do is whenever we get questions about the feasibility study or who conducts those feasibility studies, we generally send them to Gavin and HARC, because they've been doing this for a long time, and they're definitely the subject matter experts in Texas for these services. So we always send public entities who ask us that question over to them. Let's go to the next slide. If you have any questions regarding CHP and applicability of this statute, then you're more than welcome to contact me, or you can contact Fred Yabra in our office as well. So that's our responsibility. That's where we play in the CHP world. So Dorothy, that's all I have.
Thank you so much, Eddy. I think that was very great, short and sweet, and I think it's important to highlight that requirement. And also, I think it played very well the fact that you were right after Gavin, and that was great. So if anyone does have any questions, again, Eddy's contact information is here, as well as Fred Yabra at SECO. So yeah, awesome. Thank you so much, Eddy. All right, so we are rounding out our last of our presentations with Caley Johnson from the National Renewable Energy Lab. He's going to be speaking on fuel diversification to improve transportation resilience. So I am going to go ahead and hand it over to you, Caley, and you just let me know whenever you're ready to advance to the next slide.
Thanks, Dorothy, and also tell me if I sound robotic, and I'll cut the video.
Sound great so far.
Oh, good. So let's move on to the next slide. So I want to start with a bit of a background to transportation fuel resilience through diversity. The Department of Energy has put a fair amount of effort forth in it ever since in September 2014, they issued a seminal report titled United States Fuel Resiliency, U.S. Fuels Supply Infrastructure, that kind of outlined comparison between natural gas, petroleum, propane, and some other fuels like ethanol, where they're coming from and how resilient they were to different disasters. Then, throughout, ever since then, a series of disasters proved the value of transportation fuel diversification. Dorothy mentioned one of those during her during the winter storm Yuri, where some fleets were able to utilize CNG when diesel was unavailable. And I will also talk a bit about a few more case studies where that happened. And then DOE combined with NASIO, the National Association of State Energy Officials, to start the Initiative for Resiliency and Energy Through Vehicles, the IREV project. And so they're in case studies of EVs, biodiesel vehicles, natural gas and propane vehicles, being able to perform during natural disasters when gasoline and diesel were out of supply or unavailable. And then they've developed a couple of toolkits. This is with Clean Cities, which is a bit of an intro to clean cities. That's Department of Energy's program getting alternative fuels out there being used, and NREL and my group at NREL runs technical support for them and analytical support. So we were in pretty tight with that IREV project. And then the Department of Energy issued a funding opportunity that we applied to and got. We applied to with the Florida Office of Energy, and that is to develop the Florida Alternative Transportation Fuel Resilience Plan, where we utilize a number of alternative fuels and kind of set up the communications and infrastructure planning to help them to best utilize the alternative fuels during hurricanes in their case. And Florida is a particularly good case study that has applications and is applicable to Texas and many other states. The reason Florida is particularly interesting is that its petroleum supply is particularly vulnerable. And I'll talk to you more about that in later slides. So next slide, please. So most of you probably know of this 5-pronged approach to resilience that can apply to drinking water, medical supplies, food, and I want to talk to it about it in the context of fuel. One thing you can do to make your fuel more resilient is to add redundancy, add multiple fuels, multiple sources where they're coming from, multiple modes, how they're being transported to the area, and how they get to the vehicles. And then another way to add redundancy is to have multi-purpose vehicles. You can have a trash truck, let's say, that operates on CNG during normal times that also can be used as a street. You can put a plow on it and utilize it as a street clearer to get debris off of roads and open them up during or directly after a disaster. Storage, you need to have fuel stored nearby when sources get cut off. Access, you need to be able to plan ways to access the fuel supplies and make sure that your storage is located in a good way. In the context of Florida, you want it up high where it's less likely to be flooded. And you definitely need to set up communication strategies and backup plans in order to access the fuel supplies. Then getting resupply in is definitely key. And then you want to be able to maximize the efficiency of your vehicles so you get the most work done per the amount of fuel and the amount of energy that you can get to the vehicles. Next slide, please. So I just want to outline this redundancy and kind of fuel diversification that I spoke about in Florida in particular, but this diagram works pretty well in Texas as well. So in Florida, as I mentioned, all of the petroleum on that top line needs to come through ports. So you need to bring a ship in to a port. You need to run them. Well, in the case of Tampa, you need to run it down a 43-mile long narrow channel where if it gets blown aside, it's going to plug up the entire port. And you also need to get a specific pilot onto the ship in open seas, which when hurricanes are happening or about to happen becomes very difficult. So that is a pretty significant bottleneck in Florida's fuel supply. I know that most petroleum in Texas comes, is from the U.S. You can avoid that ship, but even then, there are advantages to the natural gas pipeline infrastructure versus the petroleum pipeline infrastructure, just because the natural gas pipelines are so much more thorough that you have redundancy, that if one of them has a tree fall across it, you can route natural gas around and still get to more locations. Propane, particularly in Florida, is interesting because it comes in by rail. So that's nice to have a completely different means of bringing it in. Then natural gas, as I mentioned, as you can see, it just has a kind of a simpler process for getting to the end user and to the vehicle. Fewer bottlenecks. And then electricity, you have you have the traditional supply coming from a majority natural gas, coal, some nuclear or renewables over a long transmission line to an EV charger, and then you also have the distributed renewables, which can charge a car even when other portions of the grid are down. So that adds quite a bit of resilience to the transportation. Next slide, please. So we have to take into account fuel interdependencies and timing. The cases of electricity going out is one of these major interdependencies. So when electricity gets cut, it impacts oil refineries, natural gas processing plants, pipeline compressors, terminals, and refueling stations. It really affects diesel and gasoline refueling stations where the fuel is stored below ground and you need a pump that is usually run on electricity to pull it up and make it accessible. Evacuations pose a threat to all refueling systems because many personnel are not available to make repairs. So some fuel companies are pursuing safe havens that get exemptions from evacuation plans so that they can keep their staff and technicians close to where they need to be. Past hurricanes show electricity is the most likely to be disrupted, then petroleum pipelines, then natural gas pipelines. The analysis didn't include propane, so I'm not exactly sure where that lies in there, but I would think somewhere around petroleum or natural gas. So there is currently more redundancy with natural gas pipelines than petroleum, as I mentioned. Next slide, please. So some key information on the resilience of petroleum. So stocks in storage at bulk terminals and distribution centers can provide 3 to 5 days of supply of gasoline and diesel. And that is quite often shortened because you have people panicking when a hurricane or other disaster is coming. People panic and want to fill up their vehicles and have a full tank. So that tends to be what creates all of those images of people in line and stations running out of diesel and gasoline. Is you have to account for the panic purchases beforehand. As I mentioned, gasoline and diesel require electricity to pump from underground storage tanks. And then I also wanted to include this slide of Florida, since we're looking at the Florida case study of the transmission of petroleum in Florida. You have it coming in at the ports, and you have so the red lines there are general truck movements, and of course trucks are quite vulnerable to traffic snarls and other problems with hurricanes. And then you have just a few pipelines in Florida. You can see between Tampa and Orlando. The Colonial stopped before arriving in Florida up in Georgia, and they have to finish the route with trucks. So you can see the petroleum infrastructure is not very resilient in Florida. So next slide, please. And you can also see in this map how much more redundant and therefore resilient the natural gas pipelines are in Florida. And I would imagine there are even more in Texas. And these are just main distribution lines or transmission lines. It doesn't include the small residential ones. So natural gas is relatively free of choke points because of that. And so I mentioned what happens when you run out of electricity, and the transmission pipelines need electricity generally. The compressor stations on pipelines are spread out pretty far, and you lose electricity in one compressor station, you only reduce the flow 25%, and then you would have to lose 3 compressor stations along the natural gas pipeline to halt operation. And more and more pipelines are starting to have natural gas backup generators, so they're kind of self-sufficient in that way. Transfer from transmission to distribution takes place at the city gate, and most cities have 6 or more gates, so that's more redundancy. And distribution lines are kept pressurized during hurricanes to avoid infiltration, and so the utilities do everything they can to make sure that their residential distribution lines are pressurized, so they're essentially less vulnerable to floodwater getting in them and and other infiltration. Next slide, please. Man, you're good, Dorothy. All I have to do is think next slide and you got it. So natural gas. So some CNG fueling stations have natural gas powered generators in case of electrical outages. That was part of our Florida project, is to document which ones have backup generators and which ones are powered by natural gas. There are cool contraptions called fuel mules that are mobile fueling units that have their own natural gas power generators that can be placed anywhere that has residential pressure lines, and they take the natural gas, pressurize it, and can feed it into vehicles. So that really helps out with the redundancy. So the CNG tanks can be brought to the fleet. Natural gas has a pretty good track record, pretty good case study in Superstorm Sandy and Hurricane Harvey of there being important evacuation operations that stayed available because of CNG powered buses when their diesel power buses didn't have diesel available. Next slide, please. And so let's look at propane. So propane, it's, as I mentioned, it arrives to Florida from Pennsylvania and West Virginia and Ohio via rail. A unique property about propane is actually true for natural gas as well, but more applicable to propane, and because it's has separate storage tanks instead of just the pipelines, that it can be stored indefinitely and it doesn't degrade the way that gasoline and diesel do. So gasoline and diesel, you can't just have this stash that you're going to keep for the next 2 years until the next until the next natural disaster, because it will go bad. Whereas propane, you can do that. Propane also allows for mobile fueling via this truck and trailer below, and it takes about the same amount of time to refuel as gasoline. Next slide, please. And then electric vehicles are the final alternative fuel. Electric vehicles are unique because they're the only vehicle that doesn't need oxygen, which makes them potentially helpful for flooding and recovery operations. So you have numerous videos showing Tesla's fording deep water, but no follow-up for long-term effects. So that's key. Rivian, the company that's making all of the electric trucks for Amazon, claims 42 inches of fording depth in their R1T and R1S specifications, and they have videos of them testing going through that depth of water. There's a Green Car article reporting that key EV components are typically waterproof enough to last some amount of time in the water. Distributed generation can provide electricity to vehicles when the grid is down. If designed correctly, Florida has solar panels on all of their schools that they use as shelters, which is quite a help. During Japan's 2011 earthquake, the Fukushima disaster, EVs were a tremendous asset used to transport doctors, delivery supplies, and inspect buildings for safety, because they're out of petroleum for weeks and weeks after they brought their electric grid in places back up into operation. Next slide, please. And then, of course, electric vehicles can be used as power sources. So this includes PHEVs and fuel cell vehicles that can provide backup power to appliances, buildings, and potential microgrids. This is used by PG&E in the California wildfires, where they'll use their Class 5 utility trucks to power their emergency shelters. This did help out in the tsunami in Japan inspired the leaf-to-home power exporter, and now, of course, Honda created a vehicle-to-building power exporter, and Ford is really going big with it, with the home charger that comes with their Ford F-150 Lightning is going to be able to power the house that it is housed in. So next slide, I believe that's the last one. Yeah. So that's it.
Awesome, Caley, thank you so much. And I didn't mention I'm in the transportation department, and we are the local Clean Cities Coalition for our region. So we love to talk about alternative fuels and resiliency. And so a lot of the things that you touched on today, we've touched on to other local governments in our region. So it's just good to kind of see it all come together and from you. So I'm glad everyone on the line got to hear about that. And I think it's definitely an important strategy that our folks on the line can take into their hazmat plans. So Caley, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. That was great. That was a great overview.
Sure.
Yeah. Okay. So we have a couple more polling questions, I think 2, and then we're really going to jump into Q&A. I think we have 15 minutes left. So I'm just going to quickly pop these up. We'll spend maybe 30 seconds or so. And I'll put the access to the polling questions and how to do that in the chat one more time. And I know we have a couple of questions in the chat already in the queue, so I will have those ready, but let me go ahead and post this again. So what other longer term measures would you be open to considering besides diesel generators? Okay, natural gas generators. I'm not sure how to get rid of this video. I'm sorry if this is obstructing your view here, but we've got, okay, natural gas generators, microgrids coming through, combined heat and power, on or off-site renewables.
I'm writing in vehicle to building.
Yeah, exactly. Other.
All right.
Building. Oh, fabulous. Okay, very good. This is great. This is great for us. Thank you, everyone. Okay, so I see responses kind of trickling down, so I'm going to go ahead and move to the next one. All right. So what would be most helpful to you when considering adopting any of these strategies presented today into your hazmat? And this is really a good question for us, for our team, as we're considering drafting language and all of that and packaging that up for use. So I don't know how to get rid of this. I'm hoping. Okay. Awesome. So draft language, funding opportunities to help pay for these types of projects. That's always, funding is always great. We love to have that. Okay. And then more information on the ROI. Very good. Yes, agreed. Funding opportunities to help pay for these types of projects. I agree. I think that'd be very helpful. Very, very helpful. Okay, awesome. Thank you, everyone. Thank you all for participating. I appreciate it. Okay.
And
yes.
Since we didn't have another option, Dorothy, maybe everybody, if you have other things that you have in mind, if you want to just put those into the chat, like, here's something else that wasn't in that previous polling question that we heard about that we would be interested, we'd be happy to take open-ended feedback as well.
Yes,
we'll
absolutely.
do some work on that.
Absolutely. Thank you, Lori. That's a great point. Please, anything else that we can, anything to help us help you, please, please, please. Okay, and so now we are gonna kind of hit our Q&A portion of our roundtable, and I believe we have some questions in the chat for our presenters. So I think this one from James, I think this one might be geared towards your presentation, Gavin, if I remember correctly. So any thoughts on net zero carbon synthetic fuels in Texas using direct air capture CO2 and green hydrogen for combined heat and power and natural gas replacement? Not renewable natural gas and not carbon capture from fossil fuel combustion, which are not zero carbon.
Yeah, so what we're looking at as far as short term is stuff that's cost effective, and direct air capture CO2 and green hydrogen are not close to penciling out economically. From what we've seen, blue hydrogen is closer to penciling out, which is the one that's mentioned here as far as carbon capture of fossil fuel. There are some questions about criteria air pollutants that come with blue hydrogen using carbon capture utilization and storage, or carbon capture utilization there. So in any case, right now the focus is on the incremental shift. There's sometimes this tendency to go 100% from one direction to another, but when you look at the practical cost implications, taking more of a transitional steps to where we're improving as quickly as we can. And sometimes that takes, using renewable natural gas, which could be from some sort of, wastewater treatment plant, or it could be through blue hydrogen, which comes through carbon capture utilization. Ultimately, it would be great to get to green hydrogen. The pricing around that is just not economical at this point, or out to the next 10 years or so. And so we can wait for that, or we can start making a transition now. And the way most of these systems are designed is that they can pretty much take any fuel source and can operate through some minor modifications. And we just need to push the technology more quickly to get to those cleaner pieces. But I think the desire here is just, let's start moving in the appropriate direction and not wait for perfection to get there, but to start moving.
Awesome. Thanks, Gavin. And James, I hope that answered your question. If you have any follow-up, feel free to raise your hand, or you can put that in the chat as well. All right, and I think we have one more related to your presentation, Gavin. I'm going to read the whole thing for context. But looking at the current situation in Europe and the shortage of natural gas and the impact on the demand of other fuel, oil, fracking ban on federal land, etc. In your presentation, you stated combined heat and power using natural gas to generate electricity. Their question is, how does the future look like for the use and availability of natural gas?
Yeah, the short and midterm, next 15, 20 years, natural gas is going to be plenty available. What's happening in Europe is a combination of production going down due to COVID-19, as well as potentially some policy issues that Europe had in that regard. In the United States, and particularly Texas, do not operate in a similar policy environment. And you see the Biden administration wanting to drive decarbonization as much as possible, but there's also still discussions of expanding natural gas leasing operations, oil and gas operations. The intent here, once again, is to figure out ways in which to move towards the decarbonization as quickly as possible using the resources that we have now. And is natural gas perfect? And is natural gas going to be the complete long-term 30, 50-year vision? I hope it's not. But in the interim, during the life of these systems that we're talking about, 15, 20 years, there's likely not to be any significant impact on natural gas systems. And once again, as I mentioned earlier, there is significant push from the OEMs to allow for natural gas or CHP systems to be to be fuel flexible, allowing them to take in a variety of different fuels. So if there is a natural gas shortage, you see other potential fuels coming in and being able to burn just the same there. So
fabulous. Thank you so much, Gavin. That was great. And yes, if there are any additional questions or any follow-up related to that, definitely feel free to put that in the chat. And then I'm not sure if this one is related to either your presentation, Gavin, or Eddy's, but this question is, why must critical government buildings only evaluate or consider CHP as a potential energy source and not other distributed energy generation like solar and storage.
You got that one, Eddie, or you want me to get it?
We can both get it, and I'll start, and then you can wrap up. Specifically, the statute only mentions CHP. I mean, it's pretty simple. It doesn't mention the other energy storage or other energy options. So, as it relates to our responsibility, we're just following what the statute says. Now, there are other options available, and I'm sure Gavin can expand on that too.
Yeah. So when this statute was written, I believe it was 2013 or so. Yeah. 2013. And so there wasn't, when we're talking about solar and storage in this context now, where it is much more cost effective to do a microgrid application versus the CHP application, that just wasn't there, 8 years ago. When we do studies and when we look at projects, we typically look at a variety of resources. So not just say natural gas, CHP, we try to see how solar plus storage and CHP can all kind of work together, because you want that kind of optimized size for operations to make sure you're reducing emissions as much as possible, but you also have that reliability and resilience 24/7. The sun doesn't always shine, and sometimes the larger storage applications can be a bit cost prohibitive if you're looking to kind of cover that whole storage potential solar deficit. And so we look at, how do we ensure that that system operates 24/7 and operates in a way that's most cost effective and efficient. And so typically we find there's a combination of that. And so I think if there's a desire to look at, a system for a critical infrastructure, I don't think there's any limitation of not looking at, other types of systems out there in combination with CHP there. But we do try to optimize those, and we actually have a project with Department of Energy where essentially we're putting together a tool that non-technical users can use, that they can look at a variety of different resources on site to do a community energy system, microgrid, district energy system, because there are different, they all have different attributes and positive and negative attributes, and it's finding ways to optimize their deployment that makes them most cost effective, as well as optimize their operational strategies and make them most cost effective over time. And so,
Dorothy, and to address the comment of does this mean the reasons are political or politics? No, it's not. It was a timing thing. Just like Gavin said, it was just technology available at the time that the statute was committed. It was nothing, that the statute was created. There was nothing else involved other than that.
Fabulous. Thank you both. Really appreciate that insight. That's great. Awesome. Okay, so I know we have 4 minutes left, so we will, continue to take questions. And I see one for FEMA. Do the types of projects we are talking about here, so CHP and microgrids, et cetera, have to be included in hazmat plans or other types of documents to be eligible for BRIC?
So I know we only got a few minutes. That's a 30-minute conversation, but I'm going to take it down to a minute and a half or so. The short answer, yes. The little bit not so short answer is when we're looking, one of the qualifiers that we look at is what are we doing? Has the community identified that action in the local mitigation plan, right? So when we're looking at resilience and we're working on our local hazard mitigation plan and we're saying, okay, hey, we have some critical facilities. We want to ensure that they have power. Maybe a sentence or two in there to give that little extra oomph, to give that little extra clarification that we're looking at traditional and also in innovative ways to ensure that we have resilience to our critical facilities or to the power system we want to. So that little bit of extra sentence in there to look at inventive ways or additional outside the box ways to secure that these facilities have power, that's what we're looking for.
Awesome. Thank you, Marty. Good clarification and great question. Okay, and then just a last couple quick things. Definitely, if you are interested in attending a microgrid tour in North goodness, I cannot speak, in North Texas in the next year. We will be coming out with some more information on that as we get closer. So keep on the lookout for that. And we are, of course, developing case studies and best practices to a lot of what we talked about in our presentation today. And from our presenters, of course, we want to be promoting case studies and best practices from them as well. And also developing a selection of achievable energy efficiency options and suggested language for inclusion in these HAZMAP or hazardous mitigation plans and action tables. So that is really what's next for us. Thank you everyone for coming. This has been fabulous. A big thank you and shout out to our presenters, and also Krista Guzman, who really put this whole thing together, coordinated everything, and all of our presenters. So big shout out to her. She's unable to make it today, but she really put this thing together. So just wanted to give her kudos. Again, we will be following up with an email to our registrants, everyone here today, with our recording, the slides, but they will also be posted on our Conserve North Texas website. And for more information, Krista's information was right here, and Tamara, who are our program managers from Transportation and Environment and Development. Tamara, of course, Environment and Development, Lori, Transportation Department. Any questions related to any of the work that we're doing, you can definitely feel free to reach out to them, and we'll get your questions answered. So thank you, everyone.